Tristan Freeman, one of the site experts from Fansided's BustingBrackets.com, is our special guest. Let's talk basketball. This is ACC Nation, podcast, streaming radio, and YouTube. I'm Jim Quist. Will Ojanen is on break. Welcome, Tristan. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Jim. It's always a good time.
Good to see you again. The start of the college basketball season, just a few short months away. The ACC men get back into the mix on November 7th, which probably seems like an eternity for anybody who's a diehard basketball fan. You've been ranking college basketball for a few years now, and before we get into the numbers, does it get any easier to do this as time goes on?
No, actually, it's harder because of the expansion of transfer portal. I mean, at this point, all rosters have lost at least 4, 5, 6 key guys. You get all these freshmen coming in. You don't know what to think of them. And it's hard. You can basically judge off of, past, what they've done last year. But with most of them coming to a new spot, it's hard. It's basically just a guessing game at this point.
Well, hey, that's the best we can hope for. But we're going to get into a little detail here and talk about your thoughts of why and why you think some of these teams are going to succeed and why maybe some of them aren't going to. Before we take a look at the top 5 and the ACC teams that made your overall top 25, let's get your thoughts on those that might be, let's say, the surprise teams, the teams to keep an eye on, or who you might think are going to be sneaky good this season.
Yeah, I think some teams to keep an eye out when it comes to flying under the radar. One team I'm very high on is the St. Louis Billikens. They bring back the nation's leading passer in Yuri Collins. They lost Javonte Perkins last year to an injury, but he's coming back for a 6th year. He gave them 17 points per game. And then you have one of the best shooters in the country, Gibson Jimerson, 40+% from 3. They're going to make one of the best backcourts in the country. I have them ahead of Dayton as far as the A10 power rankings go. And I think the Billikens should be viewed as a second weekend team with one of the best backcourts in the country. And assuming that the front court handles their job, I don't see why St. Louis is in the top 25 throughout the season.
I'll tell you right off, that was the first team that actually caught my eye when I was going down the top 25 preseason poll. I stopped and then I read in detail. So that is a team. I think you're right. They have the potential to be sneaky good this year. Let's start at number 5. And give us your impressions and some reasoning behind number 5, Baylor.
Yeah, obviously Scott Drew, who now has the respect he deserves as a national title winner. He's always been able to develop, including mid-major transfers as well. He's working with 5-star talent. Keontae George, one of the best pure shooters in the country. He looked fantastic in Baylor's preseason expedition tour when the other guards were out. So now you bring him in along with return guard Adam Flagler. You look at LJ Cryer, who was averaging nearly 20 points per game in the first 10 games of the season before he got hurt. Their backcourt's going to be ridiculously good. And if you assume that West Virginia transfer Jalen Bridges can handle the 4th spot and replace Matthew Meyer, probably an offensive downgrade, but a defensive upgrade, they're going to have one of the best defenses in the country, as well as one of 2 or 3 best perimeters in the country. I'm probably selling them a little short, but they do have some injury concerns to deal with, but they're going to be in the title mix for sure.
At number 4, we've got Kentucky. The only, not the only, but a blue blood, the first blue blood, true blue blood, I guess, if you want to use that term. I think it's been beaten pretty solidly. Talk to us about the Wildcats. What do they have?
Oh, well, they have the best player in the country coming back in Oscar Tshiebwe. It's been over a decade since the reigning National Player of the Year returned to college. Kentucky gets that with him. He led the country in rebounding, 2020 guy in the SEC with a bunch of talented teams. So for him to be dominant there, that's going to, translate over for this year as well. Severe Wheeler is one of the top 10 passers in the country. He's back as well. And then, they have 5-star talent Case and Wallace in the backcourt. Chris Livingston is sort of that combo forward. And I think the only question for them is, do they have enough shooting and spacing? You know, Tshiebwe doesn't spread the floor. Wheeler's a 30% three-point shooter. He's not really someone that's going to shoot it. They do have Iowa transfer CJ Frederick back from injury, but could he be a defensive liability? And if Wallace sort of handles his job as sort of the second guard, do you want Frederick out there in sort of smaller lineups? So if Kentucky can get enough shooting, then they could be a title contender. But that's something that we'll have to see on the court, especially at the 4 spot, because you're going to want to have someone who doesn't crowd the front court with Tshiebwe like Keon Brooks did. You know, Brooks was a solid double-digit scorer for them, but the offense was clanky when they were in there. You know, can Jacob Toppin do that? Can Livingston do that as the small ball 4? They have options this year, and I think that'll make their offense even better. And it was one of the most efficient already. So if they're better at that end, then you have to put them as one of the top teams in the country.
Next up at number 3 is Houston.
Yeah, I mean, you basically, everything I said about Baylor, you can put for Houston, who might just be a little bit better. They were an Elite 8 team without 2 of their best players who were injured, and Marcus Sasser and Trayvon Marks. Sasser was averaging nearly 20 points per game, probably an All-American had he stayed healthy. He's coming back. Jamal Shedd was one of the best point guards in the country, who's also back. Their backcourt is going to be elite with a ton of depth. And then they have 5-star power forward Jarris Walker coming in. We'll see what kind of impact he has. He's the program's highest rated recruit in history. If he's a double-digit scorer and he gives them offensive balance in the front court, then all of a sudden this could easily be the best team in the country. There's a little questions about, you know, what production they'll have after losing their 2 starters, which prevents them from being number 2 and number 1. But the front backcourt alone makes them an easy title contender, and one that probably could be, I won't say win throughout the AAC, but outside of Memphis, I'm not sure if there's a team in the conference that can really stand up to them for 40 minutes.
Good point. At number 2, the Zags come in, and not too surprising that they're somewhere in the top 5 mix.
Yeah, I mean, you bring back Drew Timme, that automatically makes you a top 3 team in my book. I think while Tshiebwe is the most dominant player, Timmy's the best offensive player in the country. You know, he's automatic in the low block. He'll give you 20 and 8. You surround him with one of the best shooters in the country, and Rozier Bolton in the backcourt. Julian Strother, who's probably the best pro prospect on the team. He's back on the wings. And then you add the SoCon Player of the Year and transfer Malachi Smith from Chattanooga. He can play 1 through 3 in the backcourt. And who knows, he may have to play point guard if Nolan Hickman, who's a 5-star, former 5-star guy himself, he takes over for Andrew Nembhard. The only question with Gonzaga is whether or not their point guard plays at championship caliber level. They have, in my opinion, the most talent of any team in the country and the highest ceiling. We just have to know for sure that the point guard play is going to be up to national title standards.
All right. Perhaps at this point, we've got some fans moaning, here we go again. Duke is the preseason number 1. Break the news to them, Tristan.
Yeah, Duke's in the top 10, but not number 1. It's the rival North Carolina, and the team that went from almost missing the tournament after they lost to Pitt midway through league play to making the historic run all the way to a title game, being 1 minute away and arguably a healthy Armando Bacot from winning it all. You know, they returned 4 starters. You know, Armando Bacot, I would say, was right in the same caliber as Timme and Tshiebwe as best bigs in the country. You got the backcourt duo of Caleb Love and RJ Davis. Maybe a little inefficient at times. Both of them have shown they can go for 30 at any point. Leaky Black's one of the best defenders in the country. And then you add Pete Nance, a transfer from Northwestern, who led them in points and rebounding, and also quietly shot 45% from deep. So he actually can replace Manek in the shooting caliber and be a little bit of an upgrade in other categories. So when you have that in the mix, as well as a bench filled with top 100 prospects that could be used or not, it's hard to see why they shouldn't be number 1 to start the season.
Quietly shooting 45%. That's a pretty loud percentage, I'd say. For the complete list of the preseason top 25 plus 5 more teams that are waiting for their shot at rising in the rankings, make sure that you visit bustingbrackets.com. Now, let's take a look at the ACC preseason power rankings, which are just out. Let's touch on a few teams with potential before we get into that top five. Tristan, if you will allow me to go this route.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about some of these other teams that have potential, and we keep waiting for something to happen. We'll start with Miami. Wong is back. Transfer Pack comes in. What else are we looking at here? Strengths and weaknesses that are holding Laranaga's crew back or moving them forward?
Yeah, I think that the transfer Nigel Pack, who was fantastic at Kansas State, and it's also important to note he shot 45% from three, was very efficient from the field overall, and the Big 12 had 5 of the best defenses in the country last season. So you had other stars in the conference like Mike Miles and even the Baylor guards. They were actually fairly inefficient, which it wasn't their fault. It was just how strong the conference was defensively. So for Pack to be such a great scorer shows he's truly one of the best offensive players in the country. The concern, though, is he's really more of a two guard. He only averaged 2 assists a game. You could argue that the surrounding talent didn't help him in that matter, but we've seen other guards average 4 or 5 assists without much scoring, production around them as well. And Isaiah Wong's not a point guard. He's a scoring guard. So if you have 2 scoring guards, who's going to be the facilitator? And if you remember, Miami struggled in the 2 years prior when you had Wong along with Chris Likes. And Chris Likes is not a point guard. He's basically just an undersized scoring guard himself. So will we see a repeat of that, as well as a front court with some question marks, because Norchad Omier was a Sun Belt Player of the Year at Arkansas State, averaged 18 and 13. Really good player at the mid-major level, but he's an undersized 6'7" forward. And historically, smaller bigs who go to the power conference level, if they can't shoot the ball and they have to be able to score from inside, they're going to struggle against bigger, stronger defenders. If he can't produce, then where's the production going to come from? They'll need a lot from Jordan Miller. They'll need 4-star freshman AJ Casey to produce. But between the point guard questions and the front court questions, they're going to need Wong and Pack to go for a combined 40-plus in order to win most of these games. And I think the opposing head coaches in the league will find ways to prevent that.
It'll be interesting to see which one of those 2 players is going to be dishing the ball off, because I don't think either one of them want to. Next up, the question is age a good thing? We'll find out with Notre Dame this year. Mike Bray, does he finally have a roster that can move the Irish back into the mix of the ACC?
Yeah, it's going to be hard because they lost, I would say, 2 of the 3 best players when it comes to Blake Wesley and Paul Atkinson. Wesley was the guy who single-handedly revamped this entire team, because you bring back a core 2 years ago, they weren't good. They didn't make the tournament. All of a sudden, here comes Wesley, a guy who's actually able to go to the bucket and get a basket, can do so. The hope is that J.J. Starlin, who's another top 30 incoming guard, that he could be the new point guard for them, because remember, Prentice Hubb is also out. So they need a point guard somewhere. Can it be him or Niagara transfer Marcus Hammond? You bring back Dane Goodwin, who was 15 points per game, quietly enough, was all-conference caliber player. You got several guards that can shoot 40% from 3, including the big Nate Laszewski. But besides Laszewski, there's not a lot of front court depth. So you're going to need some of these freshmen to, step up and provide the depth. This is a team that can shoot really well, but again, like Miami, there's some point guard questions, and there's defensive questions as well. Like Notre Dame could score 80, but they might be giving up 80 as well. So I'm curious to see what they'll do. But Mike Bray deserves the benefit of the doubt, and I think they'll find a way. But it might not be pretty all the time.
Let's touch on a few other teams here because they're worth mentioning, in part because they've shown in the past that they have some capability. Some of these teams are turning the corner and they're building. Wake Forest, let's start with them, because this is a team I think that we have seen a coach get a lot out of a little as he started. And where's it going next?
Yeah, I mean, Wake Forest was the biggest winner in transfer portal when you take a post look at it. Alondes Williams went from being the fourth or fifth best guard at Oklahoma to the ACC Player of the Year. Like truly a lottery winning transfer for them, as well as Jake LaRavia, who went in the first round of the NBA draft. Those guys are gone, including a few other guys. They brought in four others, all of them who can shoot. You look at Jao Toka, who was a freshman player at Marist. You look at Andrew Carr, who shot 40% from the field. These are all mid-major transfers, except Tyree Appleby, who was a starter at Florida. I think they brought in enough depth to where they should be able to compete in the middle of the pack for ACC. But can Davian Williamson, who's sort of the top returning guy, can he be the star? Unless one of these transfers can do that. It looks like it's going to be sort of they'll win by death, that they'll have a good 7-8 man rotation with 5 double-digit scorers. But they needed Alondes Williams to go for 20 and 6 to win the games they did last year. And now with him gone, it could be a fight. I think the respect that Steve Forbes, as head coach, that he earned last year, sort of makes people have them, sort of in the 6 through 8 range. But you could argue that from a roster standpoint, talent-wise, that they could be in 9 through 11 range if these transfers don't work out the way that we think they do. But after seeing what Williams and LaRavia did, it's hard to assume that it won't.
This is a team that, and I have a really close friend who's a big Pac fan. And he has been really frustrated for the last couple of years. I don't know if there's open talk about a hot seat for a coach here, but NC State looks to me like maybe some things are happening there. Maybe it's about time too.
Yeah, I think Coach Keats is going to be on the hot seat because this is likely the last year for their returning star, Jaquavion Smith. He's an NBA prospect. Everyone has him in the lottery area. He comes back. He could easily average 20 a game and lead the Wolfpack in scoring. The question is going to be, can all of these newcomer transfers play their roles? Like you have DJ Burns, who was a Big South Player of the Year, Winthrop. He's a solid front court player. You have the Utah transfer, big man, who also should add some depth. This year's team, I think, is much more balanced compared to last year's team, especially defensively, where they'll actually try on defense. Is there enough shooting? They also have point guard questions, too, because I'm not sure if Cam Hayes is the answer, and Smith isn't a point guard. He's going to be a chucker. He's going to put up 15 to 20 shots. We'll see how that works. They have enough talent on paper to compete. The question is going to be whether or not defensively they're good enough and whether or not they don't need to rely on Smith going for 20 plus in each game to give them a shot at winning.
Interesting. Pitt. Let's talk about what's going on there, because to me that's been a head scratcher. Well, to some degree, because they've gone through some really rough times, the coaching, etc. But there's the potential of something happening this season.
Yeah, I think if you took Pitt's roster and put Steve Forbes on it, people might have this team in the 6 through 8 range, because there's actually a lot of talent. John Hughley averaged 15 and 8 without having any perimeter play to work with. And you now give him Dior Johnson, who's currently ranked in the top 40 of the freshman class, but at one point was a top 10 prospect in 5-star. If he looks like that and can give them 12 to 15 points per game as a true point guard, something they didn't have last year, that automatically raises the ceiling for them. You give them 6-year transfer Nelly Cummins, a hometown guy from Colgate who was an effective starter. You add Greg Elliott, who shot 40% from deep. You get Nike Sabande back, who missed last year with an injury. Jamarius Bird, another double-digit scorer. There's real good offensive potential with this team. And you even add the Diaz-Graham brothers, who's a couple of 6'11" forwards, who's athletic, who can shoot the ball and is good defenders. This team, I think, has a high ceiling, but also a low floor, because many of these guys also aren't proven at the ACC level. We don't know what Dior Johnson will do. We don't know what Cummins will do at the ACC level, because it's far different from the Patriot League. this is going to be a team that has the potential to do it, but we'll see early on when they take on West Virginia in the first week of the season in the backyard brawl of their own at home against Pitt. If they don't win that game or at least look very competitive, then I think you're going to hear the murmurs go with Coach Cooper.
And here's a question I think that everybody has, especially the fans over in Louisville. What's up with the Cards? Empty cupboard and a total rebuild going on there?
Yeah, it almost feels like the new coach Kenny Payne is almost forgetting about this year and focusing solely on 2023-24. They're obviously going after top five-star, the five-star prospect. His name's escaping me, but the family friend of theirs. But if they can't get him or Aaron Bradshaw, the five-star center, they're going to be in big trouble. This upcoming year, they have L. Ellis as the only true guard that's coming back. They added a 3-star freshman who should get some minutes there. They're arguably their two best players might be freshmen in Kamari Lands and Devin Reed. So if you don't get them, you can be in some real trouble. They have Tennessee transfer Brandon Huntley Hatfield. He's a solid player as well. I think this team is likely going to struggle. The question is going to be whether or not fans are patient, and quite frankly, whether or not the results on the recruiting trail gets them off their back. Because if they go, 4-16 or worse in league play, and Kentucky gets DJ Wagner, whose name I remiss, if Kentucky gets Wagner or Bradshaw, it's going to be rough for Coach Payne. But fans, from what I've seen, they're being patient for now. But when you go an entire offseason cycle and there's 1,500 players in the portal and you don't get one transfer guard to at least pair with L. Ellis, that's some mismanagement on their part.
Yeah, that's got to raise a red flag with people. Did it with you when you first knew that was going on? Did that sort of say something's not right?
Yeah, I mean, the Coach Payne said, early on that he didn't want to get 1-year rentals, that he wanted to build a culture, which while I understand and it makes more sense at the pro level, it's hard to build a culture if your team goes 4-16 in league play, because then other guys aren't going to want to play with you. There's also the argument that maybe they didn't go hard enough on certain transfers because they really wanted to make sure that DJ Wagner could come in and lead the offense. The problem with that is if you were reportedly linked to Amani Bates and everything that goes into, that's kind of hard to make a culture standpoint. Now, maybe they ultimately didn't want to go with it, but you spent a fair amount of time on Bates and Tyrese Hunter. Neither of them was going to work out, and you basically just decide not to go after anyone else. That's sort of a rough move to make, and one that could easily come back to haunt them, especially if L. Ellis isn't ready, to be a 35-minute per game point guard. Which is what he's going to have to do because they legitimately don't have any other options.
I'm looking forward to interviewing somebody that covers Louisville specifically to see what the reaction, just what you just laid out here, what their reaction to that off-season action or lack thereof has been. Boy, that's mind-boggling, to be honest with you. I don't get it, but hey, you give at that level, you give coaches at least for a year benefit of the doubt. We'll see what happens. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's go with the top 5 in your ACC men's basketball rankings. We're going to go with number 5, Mutts transfers, and I'm not going to say, is it Basil or is it Basile and Poteet, Couture? There's more. The Hokies, Virginia Tech, number 5. I probably butchered all of their names.
That's okay. I do too. That's what's great about being a writer. No one can tell if you butchered. But Mike Young deserves all the benefit of doubt. You don't have Keve Aluma, which is obviously a big loss, but Justin Mutts is one of the more underrated players in the country. Can truly do a little bit of everything for them. I wouldn't be surprised if his role expands to where he's averaging 15, 7, and 5 next year. Like, he's capable of that. Grant Vasile, the Wright State transfer, he really good scorer at the Horizon League level. His defense is a question, and whether or not he can, because Mutts is so versatile, you can put Basile at the 5, have Mutts play the 4, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue, so that should be fine. Couture and Sean Perdue are 2 great shooters. I think this Virginia Tech team, like Notre Dame, can easily be one of the best shooting teams in the country again. And if that happens, then their floor is going to be raised. I do have questions about their point guard play. I do wonder if they're not ends up leading the team in assists, which can be a good or a bad thing. You would prefer if your guards can lead the way, but I think as long as those guards can shoot, even if there's some defensive questions, I think Virginia Tech will be fine overall.
At number 4, Virginia, Gardner, Beekman, Clark, and Moore. What do they need to do to become that team again?
Yeah, they're going to have to shoot better. And it's particularly Frankman and Clark. Like Gardner isn't a shooter, and neither are the centers. So there's automatically going to be spacing concerns. Franklin was very inefficient from the field, shot under 40%. I feel like if one of the starters could potentially be in danger of losing minutes based on the incoming freshman and transfer class, it's probably him. They bring in Ohio transfer Ben Vanderplas, who's a versatile player. Maybe you have him play at the 3 to give them some more size. Reese Beekman, you would like to see more offense from him because he has star potential. And maybe if there's less of Kihei Clark and more Beekman, that could be the way to go. They do have shooters coming in from the class, and any Tony Bennett team should always be viewed as a threat, assuming they get through the non-conference play without bad losses, and with the ACC expected to, take a step forward in terms of the regular season play, which is why they didn't have as many bids as they normally do. Virginia should benefit from that and get back to the tournament. They'll always be capable of beating Duke and Virginia because of their defense, but their offensive inconsistency at times makes them vulnerable to losses to Pitt and Boston College and even Georgia Tech. So if they clean that up, they should be just fine.
Number 3, Florida State, Cleveland, last year's ACC 6th man, Mills, and what looks like plenty of big men to clog up the lanes here. I mean,
the front, the front court should be fine. They have a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year transferred, Jalen Gainey from Brown. He fits what they have. He's not going to score much, but he'll defend very well. Matthew Cleveland is almost a lock for people's lottery next year. He doesn't even shoot, and he only made 6 3-pointers last year, which isn't ideal for a wing or your best player. If you're going to be your best perimeter player, you're going to have to be a threat from deep. He's worked on that. I think that he could have a breakout year. Caleb Mills is a solid guard. I don't think he's good enough as a point guard for them. So you're going to need Jalen Worley, who's a traditional point guard, to sort of have a breakout campaign of his own. If he does that, they'll be fine. Also, Darren Green's a double-digit scorer and shooter from UCF. There's enough offense for them. Their defense should be fine just again. And look out for front court freshman Baba Miller, who comes from Spain. He's a top 75 prospect. He's one of those that fits the long line of international guys that comes in a little under the radar and then just explodes out of nowhere. He has all the tools. It'll be interesting to see if he's someone that stands out early on for the Seminoles and gives them some offensive firepower inside.
That's somebody that I'm keeping an eye on, because just what you said, I think with all of that skill set that he picked up overseas or in Europe, he has the potential to really tear up some things. And number 2 is Duke. They've got the number 1 incoming freshman class. They've got Roach, Lively, Whitehead, but surgery may be holding them out. And the question is, for how long?
Yeah, the Dukes says that he should be back by around opening day. The same thing happened with AJ Griffin a year ago, but it took him another month to sort of get back into the fold. He was coming off the bench. He wasn't himself. Took him a while. We don't know if the same will happen to Whitehead or not, but he should at least be on the roster and suiting up by opening night, which is a good thing. Ultimately, Duke is going to come down to Roach, because last year's point guard was effectively Wendell Moore. It wasn't even Roach, and Roach spent a lot of time on the bench before he sort of have his coming out party in NCAA tournament. So if Roach can be the lead passer as well as a good scorer for them, then they'll be a title contender. If his up and down play continues even as a junior, then unless Tyrese Proctor, who is a reclass candidate to join this year, unless he's sort of the hidden gem that can immediately play, they're going to have some up and downs, and they could be sort of like one of those 3, 4, 5 seeds that people will still view as a threat in March, but could also not be good enough for a Final Four. And who knows what the freshman class? They're all different. Duke's had a bunch of All-American big men. Could Derek Lively be one of those that can do it in year one, or maybe he's just solid? Filipkowski, the same thing as a 4 or 5 man. It'll be interesting to see which of the freshmen are the stars, but they're going to need someone to be a star, as well as Roach, a star in his own right, for them to reach their potential.
I got a question for you. Do you think, with Coach K out of the picture, that Duke will continue to be a one and done type of team?
Yeah, they will, because players are going to want to go to Duke. And if you have top 10 prospects saying that they want to come there, you're not turning them down. Now, what Shire will do is he'll explore transfer portal more, because as we've seen in the past with Duke and Kentucky's lack of success, young teams just aren't going to win a March. You have to be older, which is why they also went out and got Illinois transfer Jacob Granderson. But it'll be a mixture. You're going to have your 5-star guys, but you're also going to try and bring in some transfers to at least have some leadership and veteran players around there. But ultimately, if you're a one-and-done player and you still want to go Duke because it's Duke, with or without Coach K, you're going to want to bring those guys in.
Good point. I like that. The maturity mixed with the one and dones. That's a good approach. At number 1 is North Carolina, and Hubert Davis looks to have returned the Tar Heels to their sweet spot in ACC hoops, Tristan. He's got 4 of 5 starters back. You talked a little bit about some of them a couple of minutes ago. Share your thoughts on this team and how deep their bench goes.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Washington's a top 40 freshman forward who should be able to get minutes. You have Tyler Nickel coming in. You also have several players from last year's class who got some minutes before they just went 6 deep. Puff Johnson was someone that you saw in the NCAA tournament when Baycott went out. You look at DeMarco Dunn, who's a proven shooter. I think these are all guys that we'll see a year from now, because there's a good chance that all 5 stars will be gone. So it's hard to see what the bench players will do, because when in doubt, coaches will go 6, 7 deep. But I think the interesting part with the Tar Heels this year is that Duke had all the targets because of Coach K's retirement tour. Like, everyone focused on Duke in the ACC. This year, all the eyes are going to be on North Carolina, because they're the team that went to the title game. They're the ones that had all the attention. They're going to have the target on their back. And the one concern you had with the Tar Heels last year was they were a little soft at times. Like, when you hit them, when you punch them in the face real good, they retreated. Did they make a full turn on that, or was it just for the postseason? But they're going to get everyone's best shot. It won't be Duke this year. It's going to be the Tar Heels. They have the likely player of the year candidate, Baycott. They have the guards. They have the coach at Hubert Davis, who is now sort of the big man in the ACC in a way. What they'll do, being the hunted instead of the hunter, is going to be very interesting, because it could be something that they sort of shy away from, and it could cost them to lose some games. So even though they're the favorite on paper, we've seen this in the past, but teams like Virginia and Florida State, even Virginia Tech, are capable of winning the regular season because they lose fewer bad games, and who knows whether or not the Tar Heels are ready for it.
So there's plenty of teams that we haven't touched base on, and here's what I recommend. Be sure to visit bustingbrackets.com for the complete top to bottom power rankings of ACC men's basketball teams. Tristan has written up a great piece, and it gets into detail and gets you in the mood for the college basketball season, which is just a couple of months away. Bustingbrackets.com. Check it out. The ACC men's basketball teams ranked from 1 to 15. Subscribe to ACC Nation on your favorite podcast and streaming radio platform. And be sure to like and subscribe to ACC Nation on YouTube. We want to thank our special guest, Tristan Freeman of bustingbrackets.com. If you're looking for great basketball content, make sure you follow Tristan on Twitter. He's at HoopsNut351. That's HoopsNut351. And subscribe to Fansided's bustingbrackets.com. I want to thank you, Tristan, for joining us and getting us in the mood for some basketball.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me on.